The following video will show you just 15 of the many selections from non-Muslims telling you what they think of the last prophet, Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. Dr. William Draper, in History of Intellectual Development of Europe, 4 years after the death of Justinian, AD 569, was born in Mecca, in Arabia, the man who, of all men, has exercised the greatest influence upon the human race, to be the religious head of many empires, to guide the daily life of 1/3 of the human race, may perhaps justify the title of a messenger of God. Philip K. Hitti, in History of the Arabs, within a brief span of mortal life, Muhammad called forth of unpromising material a nation never wielded before. In a country that was hitherto but a geographical expression, he established a religion which in vast areas suppressed Christianity and Judaism, and laid the basis of an empire that was soon to embrace within its far-flung boundaries the fairest provinces in the then civilized world. Thomas Carlyle, in Heroes and Hero Worship and the Heroic in History, the lies which well-meaning zeal has heaped round this man are disgraceful to ourselves only. A silent, great soul, one of that who cannot but be earnest. He was to kindle the world. The world's maker had ordered so. Mahatma Gandhi, statement published in Young India, 1924. I wanted to know the best of the life of one who holds today an undisputed sway over the hearts of millions of mankind. I became more than ever convinced that it was not the sword that won a place for Islam in those days in the scheme of life. It was the rigid simplicity, the utter self-effacement of the Prophet, the scrupulous regard for pledges, his intense devotion to his friends and followers, his intrepidity, his fearlessness, his absolute trust in God and in his own mission. These, and not the sword, carried everything before them and surmounted every obstacle. When I closed the second volume of the Prophet's biography, I was sorry there was not more for me to read of that great life. Edward Gibbon and Simon Oakley, in History of the Saracen Empire, London, 1870. The greatest success of Muhammad's life was effected by sheer moral force. It is not the propagation, but the permanency of his religion that deserves our wonder. The same pure and perfect impression which he engraved at Mecca and Medina is preserved after the revolutions of 12 centuries by the Indians, the African and the Turkish proselytes of the Qur'an. The Mohammedans have uniformly withstood the temptation of reducing the object of their faith and devotion to a level with the senses and imagination of man. I believe in one God, and Muhammad, the apostle of God, is the simple and invariable profession of Islam. The intellectual image of the deity has never been degraded by any visible idol. The honors of the prophet have never transgressed the measure of human virtue, and his living precepts have restrained the gratitude of his disciples within the bounds of reason and religion. Reverend Bosworth Smith, in Muhammad and Mohammedanism, London, 1874. Head of the state as well as the church, he was Caesar and Pope in one. But he was Pope without the Pope's pretensions, and Caesar without the legions of Caesar, without a standing army, without a bodyguard, without a police force, without a fixed revenue. If ever a man ruled by a right divine, it was Muhammad, for he had all the powers without their supports. He cared not for the dressings of power. The simplicity of his private life was in keeping with his public life. In Mohammedanism, everything is different here. Instead of the shadowy and the mysterious, we have history. We know of the external history of Muhammad, while for his internal history, after his mission had been proclaimed, we have a book absolutely unique in its origin, in its preservation, on the substantial authority of which no one has ever been able to cast a serious doubt. Gibbon, in The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, 1823. The good sense of Muhammad despised the pomp of royalty. The apostle of God submitted to the menial offices of the family. He kindled the fire, swept the floor, milked the ewes, and mended with his own hands his shoes and garments. Disdaining the penance and merit of a hermit, he observed without effort of vanity the abstemious diet of an Arab. De Lacy O'Leary, in Islam at the Crossroads, London, 1923. History makes it clear, however, that the legend of fanatical Muslims sweeping through the world and forcing Islam at the point of sword upon conquered races is one of the most fantastically absurd myths that historians have ever repeated. Sir George Bernard Shaw in The Genuine Islam, Volume 1, Number 8, 1936. If any religion had the chance of ruling over England, nay, Europe, within the next 100 years, it could be Islam. I have always held the religion of Muhammad in high estimation because of its wonderful vitality. It is the only religion which appears to me to possess that assimilating capacity to the changing phase of existence which can make itself appeal to every age. I have studied him, the wonderful man, and in my opinion, far from being an antichrist, he must be called the savior of humanity. I believe that if a man like him were to assume the dictatorship of the modern world, he would succeed in solving its problems in a way that would bring it the much-needed peace and happiness. I have prophesied about the faith of Muhammad that it would be acceptable to the Europe of tomorrow as it is beginning to be acceptable to the Europe of today. Michael Hart in The 100, a ranking of the most influential persons in history, New York, 1978. My choice of Muhammad to lead the list of the world's most influential persons may surprise some readers and may be questioned by others, but he was the only man in history who was supremely successful on both the secular and religious level. It is probable that the relative influence of Muhammad on Islam has been larger than the combined influence of Jesus Christ and St. Paul on Christianity. It is this unparalleled combination of secular and religious influence which I feel entitles Muhammad to be considered the most influential single figure in human history. W. Montgomery Watt in Muhammad at Mecca, Oxford, 1953. His readiness to undergo persecution for his beliefs, the high moral character of the men who believed in him and looked up to him as a leader, and the greatness of his ultimate achievement all argue his fundamental integrity. To suppose Muhammad an impostor raises more problems than it solves. Moreover, none of the great figures of history is so poorly appreciated in the West as Muhammad. Thus, not merely must we credit Muhammad with essential honesty and integrity of purpose, if we are to understand him at all. If we are to correct the errors we have inherited from the past, we must not forget the conclusive proof is a much stricter requirement than a show of plausibility, and in a matter such as this, only to be attained with difficulty. Washington Irving in Muhammad and His Successors. He was sober and abstemious in his diet and a rigorous observer of fasts. He indulged in no magnificence of apparel, the ostentation of a petty mind, neither was his simplicity in dress affected, but a result of real disregard for distinction from so trivial a source. In his private dealings he was just. He treated friends and strangers, the rich and poor, the powerful and weak, with equity, and was beloved by the common people for the affability with which he received them and listened to their complaints. His military triumphs awakened no pride nor vainglory, as they would have done had they been effected for selfish purposes. In the time of his greatest power, he maintained the same simplicity of manners and appearance as in the days of his adversity. So far from affecting a regal state, he was displeased if, on entering a room, any unusual testimonials of respect were shown to him. If he aimed at a universal dominion, it was the dominion of faith. As to the temporal rule which grew up in his hands, as he used it without ostentation, so he took no step to perpetuate it in his family. James Michener in Islam, the Misunderstood Religion, Reader's Digest, May 1955, pages 68 to 70. No other religion in history spread so rapidly as Islam. The West has widely believed that this surge of religion was made possible by the sword, but no modern scholar accepts this idea, and the Qur'an is explicit in the support of the freedom of conscience. Like almost every major prophet before him, Muhammad fought shy of serving as the transmitter of God's word, sensing his own inadequacy. But the angel commanded, "Read." So far as we know, Muhammad was unable to read or write, but he began to dictate those inspired words which would soon revolutionize a large segment of the earth. There is one God. In all things, Muhammad was profoundly practical. When his beloved son Ibrahim died, an eclipse occurred, and rumors of God's personal condolence quickly arose, whereupon Muhammad is said to have announced, "An eclipse is a phenomenon of nature. It is foolish to attribute such things to the death or birth of a human being." At Muhammad's own death, an attempt was made to deify him but the man who was to become his administrative successor killed the hysteria with one of the noblest speeches in religious history. If there are any among you who worshipped Muhammad, he is dead. But if it is God you worshipped, he lives forever. Lawrence E. Brown in The Prospects of Islam, 1944. Incidentally, these well-established facts dispose of the idea, so widely fostered in Christian writings, that the Muslims, wherever they went, forced people to accept Islam at the point of the sword. Alphonse de Lamartine in Histoire de la Turquie, Paris, 1854. Never has a man set for himself, voluntarily or involuntarily, a more sublime aim, since this aim was superhuman, to subvert superstitions which had been imposed between man and his Creator, to render God unto man, and man unto God, to restore the rational and sacred idea of divinity amidst the chaos of the material and disfigured gods of idolatry then existing. Never has a man undertaken a work so far beyond human power with so feeble means, for he, Muhammad, had in the conception, as well as in the execution of such a great design, no other instrument than himself, and no other aid except a handful of men living in a corner of the desert. Finally, never has a man accomplished such a huge and lasting revolution in the world, because in less than 2 centuries after its appearance, Islam, in faith and in arms, reigned over the whole of Arabia and conquered in God's name Persia, Khorasan, Transoxania, Western India, Syria, Egypt, Abyssinia, all the known continent of northern Africa, numerous islands of the Mediterranean Sea, Spain, and part of Gaul. If greatness of purpose, smallness of means, and astonishing results are the 3 criteria of a human genius, who could dare compare any great man in history with Muhammad? The most famous men created arms, laws, and empires only. They founded, if anything at all, no more than material powers which often crumbled away before their eyes. This man moved not only armies, legislations, empires, peoples, dynasties, but millions of men in 1/3 of the then inhabited world. And more than that, he moved the altars, the gods, the religions, the ideas, the beliefs, and the souls. On the basis of a book, every letter which has become law, he created a spiritual nationality which blends together peoples of every tongue and race. He has left the indelible characteristic of this Muslim nationality, the hatred of false gods, and the passion for the one and immaterial God. This avenging patriotism against the profanation of heaven formed the virtue of the followers of Muhammad. The conquest of 1/3 the earth to the dogma was his miracle, or rather it was not the miracle of man, but that of reason. The idea of the unity of God, proclaimed amidst the exhaustion of the fabulous Theogonies, was in itself such a miracle that upon its utterance from his lips, it destroyed all the ancient temples of idols and set on fire 1/3 of the world. His life, his meditations, his heroic revelings against the superstitions of his country, and his boldness in defying the furies of idolatry, his firmness in enduring them for 15 years in Mecca, his acceptance of the role of public scorn and almost of being a victim of his fellow countrymen, this dogma was twofold: the unity of God and the immateriality of God, the former telling what God is, the latter telling what God is not, the one overthrowing false gods with the sword, the other starting an idea with words. Philosopher, orator, apostle, legislator, conqueror of ideas, restorer of rational beliefs, the founder of 20 terrestrial empires and of 1 spiritual empire. That is Muhammad. As regards all standards by which human greatness may be measured, we may well ask, is there any man greater than he?
There is no man more dear to me throughout the whole of history than the one who was sent as a guide, leading people from darkness to light. His message was simple and clear, that there is one God whom we must all fear, inviting people towards a
In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. From Muhammad, the messenger of God, to Heraclius, the emperor of Byzantium, greetings to him who is the follower of righteous guidance. I bid you to hear the divine call. I am the messenger of God to the people. Accept Islam for your salvation.
Muhammad, messenger of God? Who gave him this authority?
God sent Muhammad as a mercy to mankind.
Muhammad teaches you a slave is equal to his master. Is Black Bilal, whom I paid money for, equal to me?
Yes. Muhammad says, before God, all men are as equal as the teeth of a comb.
Who's stronger now? Your master, or this one God of yours? One God. Have mercy! Stretch her! Who is your God? Answer me! Say it! Say Hubal is your God! Say it!
There is only one God. And Muhammad is the messenger of God.
For years, we worshipped wood and stone, images of our own manufacture. We lived in ignorance of God. We had few earthly laws and no heavenly laws. The rich neglect the poor, and the natural pity of man, whereby he lifts his brother up when he has fallen, is described by them as upsetting social order. To this inhumanity has come a man whom God chose, and in that we believe.
What does your miracle, your Qur'an, say of the birth of our dear Lord Jesus Christ?
May I relate the words?
Come closer to me.
Relate in the book the story of Mary, how she withdrew from her family to a place in the east, how we sent to her our angel Gabriel, who said, I am a messenger from your God, to announce the birth of a holy son to you. She said, how shall I, Mary, have a son when no man has touched me? And Gabriel replied, for your Lord says, it will happen. We appoint him as a sign unto man, and a mercy from us. It is a thing ordained.
What Christ says, and what your Muhammad says, is like two rays from the same lamp.
These are the disciplines the Prophet puts upon you. You may not harm a woman, a child, or any old person. You may not harm cripples. You may not harm the man that works in the field. You may not cut down trees. Strike only at those who have expelled you, who have stolen your rights and enriched themselves with your possessions.
You're not the rope we're trying to prisoners. They have roped us. Cut them loose. I said cut them loose. And give them water. And share your food. Equal mouthfuls. And if they walk, walk beside them. Any prisoner who can teach 10 Muslims to read will go free.
Unless you desire for your neighbor what you desire for yourself, you don't have faith. A man who goes to bed with his belly full while his neighbor is hungry,
He isn't a Muslim. The ink of a scholar is holier than the blood of a martyr. A man reading is handsome in the sight of God. So learn to read. And when you have learned, teach.
The people of the book, the Jews with their Bible, the Christians with their Testament, must be respected by you. For their books likewise came from God.
الصلاة والسلام عليك يا
the sand that met his feet. I'm jealous of honey he tasted sweet, of birds that hovered above his head, of spiders who spun their sacred web. To save him from his enemies, I envy clouds formed from the seas that gave him cover from the heat of a sun whose light could not compete with his, whose face did shine so bright that all was clear in blinding night. I envy sightless trees that gazed upon his form completely dazed, not knowing if the sun had risen, but felt themselves in unison with those who prayed and fasted too, simply because he told them to. With truth and kindness, charity from God who gave such clarity, his mercy comes in one he sent to mold our hearts more heaven bent. I envy all there at his side who watched the turning of the tide as truth prevailed and falsehood fled and hope restored life to the dead. Women and men through him found grace to seek together God's noble face. I envy the cup that gave him drink, his thoughts that helped us all to think, to be one thought that passed his mind, inspiring him to act so kind. For me, this world is not one jot, if I could simply be a thought, from him to God throughout the ages, as revelation came in stages. I pity all who think it odd to hear him say there is one God, or he was sent by God to men to hone their spirit's acumen. It's pride that blinds us from the sight, that helps good men to see his light. He taught us all to be God's slaves, and he will be the one who saves humanity from sinful pride. Muhammad has God on his side. So on this day be blessed and sing, for he was born to grace our spring, with lilies, flowers, life's rebirth, in a dome of green like his on earth.
سيد الأولين والآخرين الصلاة والسلام عليك يا الصلاة والسلام عليك يا سيدي عليك يا عليك يا سيدي عليك يا سيد الأولين والآخرين